Nimrod by Elgar, music to remember one of his friends. As we remember and prepare for the National Act of Remembrance. Purcell's music, When I Am Laid in Earth, echoing the countless funerals that took place in the field, at battles and after battles, as soldiers take care of their own. And it is those countless memories, be they buried in the land or in the foaming seas of the world, we will remember them. As servicemen and women of today watch the cross-bearer of the Chapels Royal leads out the 10 children of the Chapels Royal and the 6 gentlemen in ordinary, the director of music, the sergeant of the vestry, Jonathan Simpson, the forces chaplain, the Venerable John Ellis, chaplain-in-chief of the Royal Air Force, the sub-dean of the Chapels Royal, Lieutenant Colonel the Reverend Canon Paul Wright, and for the first time, the new Dean of the Chapels Royal, the Bishop of London, the Right Reverend and Right Honourable Dame Sarah Mullaly. A reminder that at so many battles throughout the history of the British Armed Forces, there has always been time to stop, time to reflect upon religious elements in preparation for battle. And those religious elements have in their own way played a valuable and quiet part in the preparation of each serviceman and woman for the challenges of battle. Away from their mothers and fathers, their families, amongst their own and gathered in the sense of duty. Religion has always played its part in private ways for servicemen and women in battle. Led by the Prime Minister. The leaders of our political world take their place to honour the dead. Followed by previous Prime Ministers who have also, like the present Prime Minister, taken the responsibility for sending Britain's armed forces into battle around the world. Other representatives of the House of Lords and the House of Commons, different political parties, the leader of Her Majesty the Queen's opposition. And behind them, and to form a square around this centre of the world's thought and the nation's Act of Remembrance. Representatives of the civil services, the Ambassador of Ireland, the Chief of the Defence Staff and the Chiefs of the naval, army, and air staff. Joining them with wreaths of poppies from thoughts around what was once the British Empire, the Commonwealth. The personal message from the Prime Minister written upon her wreath, ready to be laid, as so many Prime Ministers have since Lloyd George was the first to lay his wreath in 1920 at the base of the temporary cenotaph, which became such a permanent symbol. And today, we remember 100 years ago, and we remember so many other military activities and combats that have led to the loss of sons and daughters and members of families. Representatives of the wide representation of religious belief, too, are here this year for the first time. Representatives of the humanists. Recognition that parts of the population have many different ways of finding an understanding of this universe in which we take our lives and face our challenges. And the Queen's Scouts, either side of the entrance, waiting now to play their part in salute to the Queen's wreath and other wreaths and members of the royal family who will come out and take their position. Shortly, Her Majesty the Queen will take her position on the central balcony above the main entrance. This great cenotaph with its empty tomb is ready for your thoughts, wherever you are, when you join us here for this national act of remembrance, echoed in villages and towns all over the kingdom and throughout the empire. Her Majesty the Queen will now lead the nation in remembrance as we remember 100 years ago, the Armistice that ended the Great War.
You're watching Sky News and the National Act of Remembrance as Her Majesty the Queen's equerry brings forward the Sovereign's wreath for the Prince of Wales to lay on behalf of Her Majesty. On behalf of the Queen, he salutes. And in that wreath, the nation, the Commonwealth, are led in remembrance. For the first time, at the invitation of Her Majesty the Queen on the advice of her government, the President of Germany lays his wreath. The hope of peace in the world so heavily upon those shoulders in remembrance of 2 world wars. A respect shown from a nation of allies in 2018. His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh's wreath is laid on his behalf. His Majesty, His Royal Highness was at the moment when the Imperial Japanese forces ended their conflict. As a young naval officer, he watched. The Prince of Wales's wreath, with its 3 feathers of the heir apparent, as the Field Marshal, the Prince of Wales salutes. And the first group of members of the royal family, led by the Duke of Cambridge with the Duke of Sussex, the Duke of York, who served in the Falklands War, and wearing the uniform of the Territorial Army as it was, and now the Army Reserve. The Earl of Wessex laid their wreaths. The Earl of Wessex has found the names of the last reservists who lost their lives and placed it upon his card in remembrance of the terriers who served in the First World War. The second group, led by the Princess Royal, with the Duke of Kent, whose father was killed in an air crash in Scotland during the Second World War. His brother, the Prince Michael of Kent, who served, like
Duke of Kent in the British Army for many years. And now the parade, which has stood in attention for the National Act of Remembrance, will be stood at ease. And standing easy, the Funeral March number 1 in B flat minor by Beethoven. And the Prime Minister, on behalf of Her Majesty's government, will lead the political leaders in laying her wreath. The Right Honourable Jeremy Corbyn, leader of the Labour Party and leader of the opposition. Mr. Ian Blackford, the Westminster Scottish National Party leader, and on behalf of both the Scottish Nationalist Party and Plaid Cymru parliamentary group. The leader of the Liberal Democrats, the Right Honourable Vince Cable. The leader of the Democratic Unionist Party in Westminster, the Right Honourable Nigel Dodds. On behalf of all members of Parliament in the House of Commons, the Speaker, the Right Honourable John Bercow. And on behalf of parliamentarians in the House of Lords, the Right Honourable the Lord Fowler, Lord Speaker. Finally, with flowers gathered together to represent the United Kingdom's overseas territories, the Secretary of State for Foreign and Commonwealth Affairs, the Right Honourable Jeremy Hunt. Amongst a sea of poppies, their different colours and the places from which they come, bringing a reminder of how far reached the influences of the United Kingdom throughout the history that we now reflect upon, in particular, as the nations of the Commonwealth step forward. In the first group, the Kingdom of Canada, the Kingdom of Australia, the Kingdom of New Zealand, the Republic of South Africa, and the Republic of India. For the Queen and her family, the role of leadership, which has been hereditarily carried, particularly from the Queen's grandfather, King George V, who, on this day, 100 years ago, would have reflected upon the losses as representatives of Pakistan, Sri Lanka, Ghana, Malaysia, Nigeria, Cyprus, Sierra Leone, Tanzania, Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, and Uganda laid their wreaths. The vast quantity of nations involved in the First World War becomes so clearly evident as High Commissioners and their representatives from Kenya, Malawi, Malta, George Cross, Zambia, the Gambia, Singapore, Guyana, and Botswana add to the growing mournful red around this Portland stone memorial. The representatives of Lesotho, Barbados, Mauritius, Eswatini, formerly Swaziland, Tonga, Fiji, Bangladesh, the Bahamas, Grenada, Papua New Guinea, and the Seychelles. Some of them islands so beautiful, so far-flung, so peaceful, and yet so brought into the mayhem and madness of a world at war, not just concluding its fight in 1918, but in the Second World War too, and many conflicts beyond. Finally, the representatives of the Solomon Islands, the Commonwealth of Dominica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Belize, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Christopher and Nevis, Brunei, Namibia, Cameroon, Mozambique, and Rwanda. And we remember Zimbabwe, also, with so many sons and daughters who lost their lives in 2 world wars and beyond. Our closest neighbour and ancient friend, represented by the Ambassador of Ireland, recalling so many from the whole island of Ireland, both the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland, who laid down their lives. And while the Chief of the Defence Staff, General Senate Carter, watches, on behalf of the 3 services, the Chief of the Naval Staff, Admiral Sir Philip Downes, the Chief of the General Staff, General Mark Carlton Smith, and the Chief of the Air Staff, Air Chief Marshal Sir Stephen Hillier. The civil services are never forgotten for their role in battle, and this year, representatives of the Merchant Navy and Fishing Fleets, Captain David Johnson, the Air Transport Auxiliary Association, Mr. Christopher Garrett, and the National Fire Chiefs Council, Roy Wilshire. And the service will be led by the Dean of the Chapels Royal, Bishop Sarah Mullally.
grant, we beseech thee, that we who here do honour to the memory of those who have died in the service of their country and of the crown, may be so inspired by the spirit of their love and fortitude, that forgetting all selfish and unworthy motives, we may live only to thy glory and to the service of mankind, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
The hymn, O God, our help in ages past, our help for years to come.
Teach us, good Lord, to serve thee as thou deservest, to give and not to count the cost, to fight and not to heed the wounds, to toil and not to seek for rest, to labour and not to ask for any reward, save that of knowing that we do thy will. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive them that trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Unto God's gracious mercy and protection we commit you. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you his peace this day and always. Amen.
The Rouse will be played, followed by the national anthem. The Queen will bow to the cenotaph as the Prince of Wales will salute. The Prince of Wales will lead the President of Germany after this historic laying of a wreath on this 100th anniversary of the Armistice. Into the Foreign and Commonwealth building, followed by other members of the royal family who have laid their wreaths on behalf of the nation and on behalf of a memory of King George V, who first laid his wreath here at the cenotaph in 1920, just 2 years after the end of hostilities. The equerries follow, and one can only imagine the weight of responsibility upon a sovereign, queen as she is of 16 nations, the first to be informed of any soldier, sailor, airman or woman injured or killed. As the Dean of the Chapels Royal, lead that religious element which has been serving, as the Chapels Royal were intended to, kings back to the 14th century. And it was the Chapels Royal who went with King Henry V to the battlefield of Agincourt, and the English army crossed the river at the Somme, unknowing of a great tragedy and calamity that would hit so many families in that Battle of the Somme in 1916. On the Prime Minister's shoulders now, the responsibility of the deployment of the United Kingdom's armed forces. On her advice, they are sent in the Queen's name with the parliamentarians who must also lead us with views and a democracy that has proved so expensive in human life to maintain. Former prime ministers there leaving, and other ministers and representatives of government. As the Commonwealth leaders leave, represented here by their High Commissioners and representatives, it really is possible to recall how many nations were once part of the British Empire that was in a state of utter relief 100 years ago right now, in the first half hour of peace. The war to end all wars, or so it was hoped. Nations around the world that are such friends in so many different ways. The chiefs of the armed forces, responsible for preparing, training, getting soldiers, sailors, airmen and women ready for the challenge of delivering violence against the Queen's enemies to protect the democracy we cherish here in the United Kingdom. Representatives of so many religious thoughts, attitudes, views, hopes, brought here to represent their followers today. Finally, the Major General commanding the Household Division salutes to the cenotaph as he, his Chief of Staff and ADC leave from this hollow square, the military salute itself from the living to the dead of the cenotaph, the empty tomb. The National Act of Remembrance, led by the Queen, is now concluded. But it is only the beginning, for today we will see the march past shortly of all those gathered here by the Royal British Legion, whose National President now takes his wreath to lay it on behalf of a charity that has done so much for servicemen and women, preparing these acts of remembrance and organising this annual ceremony here at the Cenotaph. Air Marshal Walker, as the National President, leads others who will lay their wreath too, including Air Marshal Sir Barry North, who represents the Royal Air Forces Association, Mr. Charlie Brown, who's National Chairman of the Royal British Legion Scotland, Mrs. Patricia Crimes. She's the Women's Section Chairman of the Royal British Legion Women's Section. General the Lord Richards, who was once Chief of the Defence Staff, who's Deputy Grand President of the Royal Commonwealth Ex-Services League. Mr. Keith Ridley, National Chairman of the Royal Naval Association. And Mrs. Pauline Cotton, representing Transport for London. Their respective wreath layers bringing forward the wreaths. The order and structure through which all ceremony and pageantry is done in the United Kingdom is perhaps a national leitmotif, but it's also the means through which former servicemen and women know how best to honour memory and remember the dead. The tune Fame and Glory follows the trumpet voluntary, and shortly we will hear the pipes again with the pibroch of Donald Dhu. Under the instruction of Major General Ben Bathurst, the Major General commanding the Household Division, preparations are made to ensure that this parade and the ceremonies that follow it are done to the finest and the highest of Britain's standards. And the Garrison Sergeant Major, Mr. Stokes, will have held his rehearsals in barracks nearby Whitehall, where all the Commonwealth representatives will have been, to make sure that, as we have seen, due honour and respect is done here at the Cenotaph. There we see the great coffin shape at the top with its wreath of eternal memory. And into it, I hope your memories from the 2-minute silence are placed. The representatives of the Royal British Legion will now move inside and take their position on the balconies, where Her Majesty the Queen was joined by the Duchess of Cornwall and the Duchess of Cambridge to witness the National Act. And that great wreath looks down upon the reorganisation of this parade ground in order to prepare for the various columns of the veterans who have quietly been waiting up towards Trafalgar Square for their chance to march past this national symbol of remembrance. Their memories are legion, Their medals are endless, and the stories that they have to tell are an emboldening encouragement to every generation that follows, who perhaps one day will have to take their place in defending the freedoms and security of families here in the United Kingdom. The various different regimental bands of the Household Division take their position at the head of each of the various columns who will now march past. There isn't exactly a change of pace, although you will notice that the marching music is slightly slower for those who are veterans, a slower pace for a senior age. But as each column of veterans, with their memories, the organisations they represent, the different colours of their berets, the badges that are so deeply important to the fraternities and sororities that they represent, as they pass, many carry their own wreaths. These will be individually taken and placed upon the Portland stone steps of the United Kingdom's principal site of memorial. The music is unchanging year by year, prepared by the mass bands of the Household Division, many of whom took part in the Lord Mayor's show only yesterday. And yet, each of these bits of music have a traditional echo that is important for the United Kingdom.
Well, as the skirl of the pipes reverberates around Whitehall, I'm down here at the Cenotaph in this late autumn sunshine. Magnificent scenes around me here, and I'm joined by Catherine Davis here, Head of Remembrance with the Royal British Legion. I just want to get your thoughts, and very good to see you, Catherine. Your feelings about today. What a magnificent scene.
Utterly extraordinary, and I was just standing here reflecting. Much of the conversation this week has been about how we engage with youth and the younger generations, and how important remembrance is today. And standing here for that 2-minute silence with so many young people, and so many people from across the generations, and knowing that not only here in London but across the country that was the case, it just felt like the nation really came together, and it's just been an extraordinary service of remembrance.
Well, you've got a front row seat here, haven't you? And you mentioned
have.
There we can look up and down at the crowd. It really is that, as the band strikes up again, really, as you say, just a cross-section of society.
Which is incredible, and we've been acknowledging that contribution from across the Commonwealth, and we really see that here today as well.
I mean, one of the bonuses of being here is, of course, we get this magnificent view. One of the downsides about this, we can hardly hear each other over the bands. But tell me about poppies and sales this year in particular, because of the significance of 2018.
So we've created more poppies than ever this year, at 40 million poppies, with a target of 50 million for the poppy appeal this year. Final numbers won't be in, but certainly I know that the demand and people wearing poppies and has been extraordinary, and everywhere that we've been engaging with thank you, where we've been talking to people about saying thank you to that First World War generation for that service and sacrifice. We've just been met with enthusiasm and people wanting to acknowledge it, as you can hear here.
And as we can see, as the veterans start their march past, fantastic siege. Tell me a little bit about the history of the poppy, though. Its origins, we all know about Flanders Fields, but when did it really take off, being worn by members of the public?
So we actually had, I don't have them here now, but I was holding earlier this morning a box of poppies from 1920, which were handmade before even the start of the Royal British Legion, which came into being with the Cenotaph in 1921. And poppies organically grew as a symbol, and the Royal British Legion took it on when it formed in 1921 as a symbol of remembrance, a symbol of hope and reconciliation for a peaceful future.
And where are you? We're talking poppies here. Just lay it on the level for us from the Royal British Legion. There's so much debate about the size of the poppy, leaves or not, position of the leaf, ceramic, etc., etc. Do you mind what kind of poppy people wear, as long as they
with pride, that's all we are.
Well, that's it. There is no, I mean, clear it up for me. Specific position of the leaf. Should you have a leaf? Shouldn't you have a leaf?
Well, I have one on both sides. So with pride is what we say. The armed forces, the service and sacrifice was for the freedoms that we have in our world today, and everybody is free to do as they would choose to do, and so with pride is all we are. And
do you have pride, as you mentioned there, that it has been passed on to the next generation? I have seen far more people wearing poppies out and about on the streets than ever before.
It certainly feels like that is the case, and that there's been an extraordinary engagement across the country with both the centenary and with remembrance. And so, yes, hopefully that we can carry that torch on into the next century.
Well, are you worried, a little bit worried about that, in that, you kind of hit a high watermark? There's been 4 years of coordination with those years of the Great War. Now it's over, it's 100 years over, but next year, the year after, it's got to keep going.
It has got to keep going. I mean, next year is the 75th anniversary of D-Day, but remembrance and the march past is not just for the centenary of the First World War, but for all service and sacrifice for the armed forces across all conflicts, from the First World War onwards. And our forces are out today still doing amazing things. And we are there for the 6.7 million armed forces and veteran population of this country.
6.7 million. Just tell us a bit more about how the money is used, where it goes, and on what projects?
So the Royal British Legion looks after the welfare of the armed forces and the veteran community, and in all sorts of incredible ways. But we are responsible for 6 care homes across the country, nursing staff that help with all sorts of problems. We have 16 pop-in centres across the country, and so once you have done a day's service, you can connect, and the British Legion is there for you throughout life, whatever your need, and will help you in any way that they can, or put you in touch with the right service to help you.
There are real concerns, though, aren't there, about the plight of some of our service personnel, those that have served even very recently.
There are always concerns, and we always strive to do as well as we can, but our doors are always open, and we are always there for people.
And some of the specific problems, you know, we hear particularly about PTSD, we hear about depression, we hear about homelessness, and we hear about service personnel ending up disproportionately in prison.
We do hear about those things. Obviously, I am the head of Remembrance, so sit with much more of a remembrance hat on, and the specifics of acknowledging that service that we're here for today, and we can talk about the
Yes. But a fantastic day all round.
A beautiful day, and an honour to the servicemen.
Thank you very, very much indeed for joining us. And with that, let's go back to Alistair Bruce to talk us through some of the scenes.
Well, Dermot, it's always a special time when the veterans, the people who remember the fights that they have faced, are marching past. But maybe the most eloquent symbol here at the cenotaph of all of them is the Widow's Cross. It was placed here almost immediately after the royal ceremony. Its white carnations, a very simple reminder of the utter pain of widowhood. And it represents how families themselves, in that most powerful way, handle loss. And each of the organisations marching past now have their stories to tell. We have some special new contingents marching past this year: the Scottish War Blinded, the Fraserburgh and Macduff Gordon Highlanders Association, the Royal Welsh Comrades Association, the Adjutant General's Corps, an amalgamation of many different organisations that themselves celebrated the Armistice 100 years ago. The Royal Artillery Association, 41 Squadron Association, the Royal Air Force Mobile Meteorological Unit, and the Royal Air Force Yatesbury Association. Welcome to them and many others. And the mobility scooters are in evidence here, reminding us all of some of the challenges faced by veterans and the support that's given to them by countless charities, to which many people contribute great amounts. We were hearing the benefits that the Royal British Legion gains from those people who put money into the collectors' boxes at stations and other places up and down the country. Even in the newsagent, a small box beside the daily paper raises money to help those who have served the United Kingdom and then subsequently need a little bit of help to get by. And all the time watched by the generation that is represented in the Royal Hospital at Chelsea. The gentleman closest to me has as his last medal the Légion d'honneur of France, which tells me he landed on D-Day with all those others. And the French are good at always recalling those Second World War veterans who played their part in the liberation of France. The scarlet that they represent, the livery of the Kings of England, as the pensioners who hand over their pension books to be looked after at Chelsea. They march past. Let's listen to the music. music playing at the moment, Oh, 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 What a Lovely War, which was one of the many songs that Tommies of the British Army sang as they marched back into the horrors and the boggy nightmare that was trench life. They spent only a few days on the very front line. They spent some in the rear lines, and then they had periods of leave to deal with some of the cold and wet that they'd had to face in that very front line. But very often the trenches were but a hearing distance, a couple of yards even, from the enemy ready to kill them. And that degree of pressure, surrounded by probably the lifeless and tragic remains of their friends who were killed in the last assault, and the smell of what would inevitably be the case, particularly on those long summer French afternoons dealing with the horrors of war. But that war ended 100 years ago today. And it is more modern conflicts that we principally recall, as the music played there by the mass bands of the Household Division. In particularly, you can see the blue plumes of the Irish Guards. So the World War I melodies, followed by the songs of the Great War. And then the Royal Marines and Royal Air Force bands will start with There'll Always Be an England. Today we mark 100 years since the Armistice, and I'm always moved by one almost shakable fact that fills me with almost dramatic shock, and that is that at the event in Sarajevo in 1914, when Archduke Franz Ferdinand was shot, which triggered the process towards the great conflagration of the First World War. The irony is that the car he was driving had the number plate or license plate A111118. Armistice, 11/11/18. Of course, you could say it's but chance. But it's a surprising chance. And it's a fascinating car to see in the museum at Sarajevo. And what a thing to recall 100 years on, as we all do, in remembrance. The famous blue beret of those who have served as part of the United Kingdom's forces in the United Nations work to try and keep peace. The United Nations that was established after the Second World War, hoping to be more successful than the League of Nations, which was established after the First World War. But each coloured beret, the maroon of the Parachute Regiment, the brown of the Guards Division and other infantry organisations, and those who are injured by war or have become unwell since, all looked after and all kept on this great march. And you know, later on, all of these people will be out in the pubs and bars of London. They'll be in their groups, they'll be, as they are, clapped on here by those who've come to support them. And if you get the chance, wherever you are in the United Kingdom or around the Commonwealth, see anybody today with their medals on, go and ask what they're about, go and ask the stories, and buy them a drink. And we see the corner there as the parade goes round into Parliament Square. They actually go back to Horse Guards Parade, where Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal is taking the concluding salute. And each member of the royal family takes their turn to represent Her Majesty the Queen and to make the veterans know that their presence here, their involvement in this event, means so much. From Scotland, representatives of regiments, now amalgamated into the Royal Regiment of Scotland, but each individual identity still represented by those who have come down from Scotland or who serve in that regiment in its past and who live in other parts of the world, gather together and come to lay their wreaths together and meet afterwards. They are all individually cheered and clapped by those who come to support this parade. The Black Watch, for instance, the Black Watch in whose ranks Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother's family, often served. Her brother Fergus was killed at the Battle of Lewes in 1915. And as the wife of King George VI, she always held memory of her brother and, in memory, trying to keep that Scottish element clear in memory. Also this year, marching past for the first time, the YMCA, the National Federation of Women's Institutes, the West India Regimental Heritage Trust, Polish Ex-Combatants Association Trust. My grandfather worked in the Royal Navy and received an honour from Poland for his work integrating the Polish brave fighters into the Allied fight back against Hitler and the German invasion of Poland. Many of these songs are those that were sung during the Second World War, and there'll be people at home now who can remember the words, and perhaps we'll let them sing out amongst their families as we listen to the music.